This story was sponsored by Gavin Critchley, who's kindly provided the funds to allow me to record it and give it as a gift from him to all of you. So thank you very much, Gavin, for your kind patronage of this channel. Thank you again. A Scandal in Bohemia by Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1 to Sherlock Holmes. She is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name in his eyes. She eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion to love for Irene Adler, all emotions but that one particularly were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen. But as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save with a jibe and a sneer. They were admirable things for the observer, excellent for drawing the veil from men's motives and actions. But for the trained reasoner to admit such intrusions into his own delicate and finely adjusted temperament was to introduce a distracting factor which might throw a doubt upon all his mental results. Grit in a sensitive instrument or a crack in one of his own high-power lenses would not be more disturbing than a strong emotion in a nature such as his. And yet there was but one woman for him, and that woman was the late Irene Adler of dubious and questionable memory. I had seen little of Holmes lately. My marriage had drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness and the home-centered interests which rise up around the man who first finds himself master of his own establishment were sufficient to absorb all my attention, while Holmes, who loathed every former society with his whole Bohemian soul, remained in our lodgings in Baker Street, buried among his old books and alternating from week to week between cocaine and ambition, the drowsiness of the drug, and the fierce energy of his own keen nature. He was still, as ever, deeply attracted by. The study of crime and occupied his immense faculties and extraordinary powers of observation in following out those clues and clearing up those mysteries which had been abandoned as hopeless by the official police. From time to time I heard some vague account of his doings, of his summons to Edessa, in the case of the Treoff murder, of his clearing up, of the singular tragedy of the Atkinson brothers at Trinum, and finally of the mission which he had accomplished so delicately and successfully for the reigning family of Holland. Beyond these signs of his activity, however, which I merely shared with all the readers of the daily press, I knew little of my former friend and companion. One night, it was the 20th of March, 1888. I was returning from a journey to a patient, for I had now returned to civil practice, when my way led me through Baker Street as I passed the well-remembered door which must always be associated in my mind with my wooing and with the dark incidents of the study in scarlet. I was seized with a keen desire to see Holmes again and to know how he was employing his extraordinary arpèges. His rooms were brilliantly lit, and even as I looked up I saw his tall, spare figure pass twice in the dark silhouette against the blind. He was pacing the room swiftly, eagerly, with his head sunk upon his chest and his hands clasped behind him. To me, who knew his every mood and habit, his attitude and manner told their own story. He was at work again. He had risen out of his drug-created dreams and was hot upon the scent of some new problem. I rang the bell and was shown up to the chamber which had formerly been in part my own. His manner was not effusive. It seldom was, but he was glad, I think, to see me. With hardly a word spoken, but with a kindly eye, he waved me to an armchair, threw across his case of cigars, and indicated a spirit case and a gasogene in the corner. Then he stood before the fire and looked me over in his singular introspective fashion. "Wedlock suits you," he remarked, "I think. Watson, that you have put on 7 and A2. Since I saw you 7, I answered, indeed, I should have thought a trifle more, just a trifle more. I fancy, Watson, and in practice again, I observe, you did not tell me that you intended to go into harness. Then, how do you know I see it? I deduce it. How do I know that you've been getting yourself very wet lately, and that you have a most clumsy and careless servant girl? My dear Holmes, said I, this is too much. You would certainly have been burned had you lived a few centuries ago, It's true that I had a country walk on Thursday and came home in a dreadful mess. But as I've changed my clothes, I can't imagine how you deduce it. As to Mary Jane, she is in courage, and my wife has given her notice, but there again, I fail to see how you work it out." He chuckled to himself and rubbed his long, nervous hands together. "It is, simplicity itself," said. "My eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where the firelight strikes it, the leather is scored by 6 almost. Parallel cuts, obviously. They have been caused by someone who has very carelessly scraped around the edges of the sole in order to remove crusted mud from it. Hence, you say, my double deduction that you had been out in vile weather, and that you had a particularly malignant boot-slitting specimen of the London slavey. As to your practice, if a gentleman walks into my room smelling of idioform, with a black mark of nitrate of silver upon his right forefinger, and a bulge on the right side of his top hat, to show where he has secreted his stethoscope, I must be dull indeed if I do not pronounce him to be an active member of the medical profession." I couldn't help laughing at the ease with which he had explained his process of deduction. "When I hear you give your reasons," I remarked, "the thing always appears to me to be so ridiculously simple that I could easily do it myself, though at each successive instance of your reasoning I am baffled until you explain your process, and yet I believe that my eyes are as good as yours quite." So he answered, lighting a cigarette and throwing himself down into an arm. "You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear, for example. You have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hole to this room. Frequently. How often? Well, some hundreds of times. Then, how many are there? How many? I don't know, quite. So you have not observed, and yet you have seen. That is just my point now. I know that there are 17 steps, because I have both seen and observed, by the way, since you are interested in these little problems, and since you are good enough to chronicle 1 or 2 of my trifling experiences, you may be interested in this." He threw over a sheet of thick pink-tinted notepaper, which had been lying open upon the table it came by. The last post said he read it aloud. The note was undated, and without either signature or address. There were call upon you tonight, at a QU to 8:00. It said, "A gentleman who desires to consult you upon a matter of the very deepest moment. Your recent services to one of the royal houses of Europe have shown that you are one who may safely be trusted with matters which are of an importance which can hardly be exaggerated. This account of you we have from all quarters received. Be in your chamber then at that hour, and do not take it amiss if your visitor wear a mask. This is indeed a mystery." I remarked, "What do you imagine that it means? I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. But the note itself, what do you deduce from it?" I carefully examined the writing and the paper upon which it was written. The man who wrote it was presumably well too, I remarked, endeavoring to imitate my companion's process. "Such paper couldn't be bought under half a crown. A packet. It is peculiarly strong and stiff." "Peculiar. That is the very word," said Holmes. "It is not an English paper at all. Hold it up to the light." I did so, and saw a large E with a small GAP and a large G with a small T woven into the texture of the paper. "What do you make of that?" asked Holmes. "The name of the maker, no doubt. Or his monogram, rather." "Not at all. The G with a small t stands for Gesellschaft, which is the German for company. It is a customary contraction, like our Kopie, of course, stands for papier. Now for the EG. Let us glance at our Continental Gazetteer." He took down a heavy brown volume from his shelves. "Eglo Egit, here we are. Agria. It is in a German-speaking country in Bohemia, not far from Carlsbad. Remarkable as being the scene of the death of a Val Enstein, and for its numerous glass factories and paper mills." "Ha, my boy, what do you make of that?" His eyes sparkled, and he sent up a great blue triumphant cloud from his cigarette. "The paper was made in Bohemia," I said precisely, "and the man who wrote the note is a German. Do note. The peculiar construction of the sentence, "This account of you we have from all quarters received a Frenchman or Russian," could not have written that it is the German who is so uncourteous to his verbs. It only remains therefore to discover what is wanted by this German who writes upon Bohemian paper, and prefers wearing a mask to showing his face. And here he comes. If I'm not mistaken, to resolve all our doubts as he spoke, there was the sharp sound of horses, hooves, and grating wheels against the curb, followed by a sharp pull. At the bell Holmes whistled a pair by the sound, said, "Yes." He continued, glancing out of the window. "A nice little broom and a pair of beauties, 150 guineas apiece. There's money in this case, Watson. If there's nothing else, I think that I better go. Holes, not a bit. Doctor, say where you are. I'm lost without my Boswell, and this promises to be interesting. It would be a pity to miss it. But your client now. Never mind him, I may want your help, and so may he. Here comes. Sit down in that armchair, Doctor, and give us your best attention." A slow and heavy step which had been heard upon the stairs, and in the passage paused immediately outside the door. Then there was a loud and authoritative tap. "Come in," said Holmes. A man entered who could hardly have been less than 6'6" in height. With the chest and limbs of a Hercules, his dress was rich with a richness which would in England be looked upon as akin to bad taste. Heavy bands of ossen was slashed across the sleeves and fronts of his double-breasted coat, while the deep blue cloak which was thrown over his shoulders was lined with flame-colored silk and secured at the neck with a brooch which consisted of a single flaming barrel boots which extended halfway up his calves, and which were trimmed at the tops with rich brown fur, completed the impression of Barber-I-C opulence which was suggested by his whole appearance. He carried a broad-brimmed hat in his hand, while he wore across the upper part of his face, extending down past the cheekbones, a black vizard mask, which he had apparently adjusted that very moment, for his hand was still raised to it as he entered from the lower part of his face. He appeared to be a man of strong character, with a thick hanging lip and a long straight chin, suggested a resolution pushed to the length of obstinacy. "You had my note?" he asked, with a deep, harsh voice, and a strongly marked German accent. "I told you that I would call." He looked from one to the other of us, as if uncertain which to address. "Pray take a seat," said Holmes. "This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who is occasionally good enough to help me in my cases. Whom have I the honor to address? You may address me as a Count von K., a Bohemian noble man. I understand that this gentleman, your friend, is a man of honor and discretion, whom I may trust with a matter of most extreme importance. If not, I should much prefer to communicate with you alone." I rose to go, but Holmes caught me by the wrist and pushed me back into my chair. "It is both or none," said he. "You may say before this gentleman anything which you may say to me." The Count shrugged his broad shoulders. "Then I must begin," said he, "by binding you both to absolute secrecy for 2 years. At the end of that time the matter will be of no importance at present. It is not too much to say that it is of such weight it may have an influence upon European history." "I promise," said H.S., "and you will excuse this mask," continued our strange visitor. "The Ost-person who employs me wishes his agent to be unknown to you, and I may confess at once that the title by which I have just called myself is not exactly my own." "I was aware of it," said Holmes. "The circumstances are of great delicacy, and every precaution has to be taken to quench what might grow to be an immense scandal, and seriously compromise one of the reigning families of Europe. To speak plainly, the matter implicates the great house of Orstein, readet 3 kings of Bohemia." I was also aware of that remembered Holmes settling himself down in his armchair and closing his eyes. Our visitor glanced with some apparent surprise at the languid, lounging figure of the man who had been no doubt depicted to him as the most incisive reasoner and the most energetic agent in Europe. Holmes slowly reopened his eyes and looked impatiently at his gigantic client. "If your Majesty would condescend to," "State your case," he remarked. "I should be better able to advise you." The man sprang from his chair and paced up and down the room in uncontrollable agitation. Then, with a gesture of desperation, he tore the mask from his face, and, it upon the ground. "You are right," he cried. "I am the king. Why should I attempt to conceal it? Why, indeed, Mem Holmes, your Majesty had not spoken before. I was aware that I was addressing Wilhelm Gottsieges, Fromstein, Grand Duke of Castle Fallstein, and hereditary King of Bohemia. But you can understand," said our strange visitor, sitting down once more and passing his hand over his high white forehead. "You can understand that I am not accustomed to doing such business in my own person, yet the matter was so delicate that I could not confide it to an agent without putting myself in his power. I have come incognito from Prague for the purpose of consulting you." "Then pre-consult," said Holmes, shutting his eyes once more. "The facts are briefly these. Some 5 years ago, during a lengthy visit to Vava, I made the acquaintance of the well-known adventuress I.R. Adler. The name is no doubt familiar to you. Kindly look her up in my index." "Doctor," murmured Holmes. Without opening his eyes for many years, he had adopted a system of docketing all paragraphs concerning men and things, so that it was difficult to name a subject or a person on which could not at once furnish information. In this case I found her biography sandwiched in between that of a Hebrew rabbi and that of a staff commander who had written a monograph upon deep-sea fishes. "Let me see," said Helms. "H. Born in New Jersey in the year 1858. Calter H. La Scala. H. Prima donna, Imperial Opera of Warsaw. Yes, retired from operatic stage, living in London." "Quite so, your Majesty, as I understand." "Became entangled with this young person, wrote her some compromising letters, and is now desirous of getting these letters back." "Precisely so. But how was there a secret marriage? None, no legal papers or certificates, none." "Then I fail to follow your Majesty. If these young persons should produce her letters for blackmailing or other purposes, how is she to prove their authenticity? That is the right thing." "Pooh, forgery. My private, not paper stolen. My own seal, imitated my photograph." "B. We were both in the photograph. Oh dear, that is very bad. Your Majesty has indeed committed an indiscretion. I was mad insane. You have compromised yourself seriously. I was only Crown Princeton. I was young. I am 30 now. It must be recovered. We have tried and failed. Your Majesty must pay. It must be bought. She will not sell stolen." "Then 5 attempts have been made twice. Burglars in my parents' at her house. Once we diverted her luggage when she traveled. Twice she has been. Veiled there has been no result, no sign of it." "Absolutely none." Holmes laughed. "It's quite a pretty little problem," said he. "But a very serious one to me," returned the king reproachfully. "Very indeed. And what does she propose to do with the photograph to ruin me? But how I am to be married, so have heard, to Cleel the Oman from Sac-Menning, and second daughter of the King of Scandinavia. You may know the strict principles of her family. She is herself the very soul of delicacy. A shadow of a doubt as to my conduct would bring the matter to one end, and Irene Adler threatens to send them the photograph, and she will do it. I know that she will do it. You do not know her, but she has the soul of steel. She has the face of the most beautiful of women, and the mind of the most resolute of men. Rather than I should marry another woman, there are no lens to she would not go. None, you're sure that she has not sent it. Yet I am sure, and why? Because she has said that she would send it on the day when the betrothal was publicly proclaimed. That will be next Monday. Then we have 3 days. Yet, said Holmes, with a yawn, that is very fortunate, as I have 1 or 2 matters of importance to look into just at present. Your Majesty will of course stay in London for the present. Certainly, you will find me at the Langham under the name of the Count F. Then I shall drop you a line to let you know how we progress. P.R. Do so. I should be all anxiety. Then, as to money, you have C.B.L. Absolutely. I tell you that I would give one the provinces of my kingdom to have that photo. And for present expenses, the king took a heavy sham leather bag from under his cloak and laid it on the table. "There are $300 in gold and $700 in NS." He said Holmes scribbled a receipt upon a sheet of his notebook and handed it to him. "And Mel's address?" He asked. "His Bryan Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood." Holmes took a note of it. One other question said he was the photograph. A cabinet. It was then. "Good night, Your Majesty, and I trust that we shall soon have some good news for you. And good night, Watson," he added. As the wheels of the royal brougham rolled down the street, "If you will be good enough to call tomorrow afternoon at 3 I should like to chat this little matter over with you two at 3 Precisely, I was at Baker Street, but Holmes hadn't yet returned. The landlady informed me that he had left the house shortly after 8 in the morning. I sat down beside the fire, however, with the intention of awaiting him however long he might be. I was already deeply interested in this inquiry, for although it was surrounded by none of the grim and strange features which were associated with the 2 crimes which I have already recorded, still the nature of the case and the exalted station of his client gave it a character of its own indeed. Apart from the nature of the investigation which my friend had on hand, there was something in his masterly grasp of a situation, and his keen, incisive reasoning, which made it a pleasure to me to study his system of work and to follow the quick, subtle methods by which he disentangled the most inextricable mysteries. So accustomed was I to his invariable success that the very possibility of his failing had ceased to enter into my head. It was close upon 4 before the door opened, and a drunken-looking groom, ill-kempt and side-whiskered, with an inflamed face and disreputable clothes, walked into the room, accustomed as I was to my friend's amazing PA in the use of disguises. I had to look 3 times before I was certain that it was indeed he. With a nod, he vanished into the bedroom, when he emerged in 5 minutes' tweet, suited and respectable. As of old, putting his hands into his pockets, he stretched out his legs in front of the fire and laughed heartily for some minutes. "Well, really?" he cried, and then he choked and laughed again until he was obliged to lie back, limp and helpless, in the chair. "What is it? It's quite too funny. I'm sure you could never guess how I employed my morning, and what I ended by doing. I can't imagine. I suppose that you've been watching the Habits and perhaps the House of Miss Irene Adler. Quite so, but the sequel was rather unusual. I'll tell you, however. I left the house a little after 8 this morning in the character of a groom, out of work. There is a wonderful sympathy and Freemasonry among horsey men. Be one of them, and you will know all that there is to know. I soon found Bryany Lodge. It is a Bayou villa with a garden at the back, but built out in front right up to the road. The 2 stories Chab locked to the door, large sitting room on the right side, well furnished with long windows almost to the floor, and those preposterous English window fasteners which child could open behind. There was nothing remarkable, save that the passage window could be reached from the top of the coach-house. I walked around it and examined it closely from every point of view, but without noting anything else of interest. I then lounged down the street and found, as I expected, that there was a mews in a lane which runs down by one wall of the garden. I lent the ostlers a hand in rubbing down their horses, and received in exchange tents a glass and a half 2 fills of shag tobacco, add as much information as I could desire about Miss Ad, to say nothing of half a dozen other people in the neighborhood, in whom I was not in the least interested, but whose biographies I was compelled to listen to. "And what of Irene Adler?" I asked. "Oh, she has turned all the men's heads down. In that part, she is the daintiest thing under a bonnet on this planet. So say the Serpentine Mews to a man she lives, quietly sings at concerts, drives out at 5 every day, and returns at 7 Evans shop for dinner, seldom goes out at other times. Except when she sings, has only 1 male visitor, but a good deal of him. He is dark, handsome, and dashing, and never calls less than once a day. Often twice he is a Mr. Godfrey Norton of the Inner Temple. See the advantages of a cabman. As a confidant, they had driven him home a dozen times from Serpentine M, and knew all about him when I listened to all they had tell. I began to walk up and down near Bryany Lodge once more, And to think over my plan of campaign, the Godfrey Norton was evidently an important factor in the matter. He was a lawyer that sounded ominous. What was the relation between them, and what the object of his repeated visits, or his client, his friend, or his mistress? If the former, she had probably transferred the photograph to his keeping. If the latter, it was less likely on the issue of this question depended whether I should continue my work at Branny Lodge or turn my attention to the gentlemen's chambers in the Temper. It was a delicate point, and it widened the field of my inquiry. I fear that I bore you with these details, but I have to let you see my little difficulties. If you are to understand the situation, I'm following you closely. I answered. I was still balancing the matter in my mind when a handsome cab drove up to Branny Lodge, and a gentleman sprang out. He was a remarkably handsome man, dark aquiline and mustached. Evidently the man of whom I'd heard he appeared to be in a great hurry shouted to the cabin to wait, and brushed past the maid, who opened the door with the air of a man who was thoroughly at home. He was in the house about half an hour, and I could catch glimpses of him in the windows of the sitting-room, pacing up and down, talking excitedly, and waving his arms of her. I could see nothing. Presently he emerged, looking even more flurried than before. As he stepped up to the cab, he pulled a gold watch from his pocket and looked at it earnestly. "Drive like the devil." He shouted first to Gross and Hankey's in Regent Street, and then to the Church of St. Monique in the Ed Road, half a guinea, if you do it in 20 minutes away. They went, and I was just wondering whether I should not do well to follow them, when up the lane came a neat little landau, the coachman with his coat only half buttoned and his tie under his ear, while all the tags of his harness were sticking out of the buckles I hadn't pulled out before. She shot out of the hall door and into it. I only caught a glimpse of her at the moment, but she was a lovely woman with a face a man might die for the Church of St. Monica. "John," she cried, "and half a sovereign. If you reach it in 20 minutes, this was quite too good to lose, Watson." I was just balancing whether I should run for it or whether I should perch behind her lander. When a cab came through the street, the driver looked twice at such a shabby fare, but I jumped in before he could object. The Church of St. Monica said, "I and half a sovereign." If you reach it in 20 minutes, it was 25 minutes to 12. And of course it was clear enough what was in the wind. My cabby drove fast. I don't think I ever drove faster, but the others were there before us. The cab and the landau with their steaming horses were in front of the door. When I arrived, I paid the man and hurried into the church. It was not a soul there save the two whom I had followed, and a surpliced clergyman who seemed to be expostulating with them. They were all three standing in a knot in front of the altar. I lounged up the side aisle like any other idler who has dropped into a church. Suddenly, to my surprise, the three at the altar faced round to me and Godfrey. Norton came running as hard as he could towards me. "Thank God," he cried, "you'll do." Come what?" Then I asked, "Come, man. Come only 3 minutes." Or he, when be illegal, I was half dragged up to the altar, and before I knew where I was, I found myself mumbling responses, which were whispered in my ear, and vouchsafing for things of which I knew nothing, and generally assisting in the secure tying up of Irene Adler spinster to Godfrey Norton bachelor. It was all done in an instant, and there was the gentleman thanking me on the one side and the lady on the other, while the clergyman beamed on me in front. It was the most preposterous position in which I ever found myself in my life, and it was the thought of that started me laughing. Just now, it seems that there had been some informality about their license, that the clergyman absolutely refused to marry them without a witness of some sort, and at my lucky appearance saved the bridegroom from having to sally out into the streets in search of a best man. The bride gave me a sovereign, and I mean to wear it on my watch chain, in memory of the occasion. That was a very unexpected turn of events. What then? Well, I found my plans very seriously menaced. It looked as if the pair might take an immediate departure, and so necessitate very prompt and energetic measures on my part at the church door. However, they separated, he driving back to the temple, and she to her own house. I shall drive out in the park at 5, as usual. she said as she left him. I heard no more. They drove away in different directions, and I went off to make my own arrangements, which are some cold beef and a glass of beer. He answered, ringing the bell. I've been too busy to think of food, and I'm likely to be busier still this evening, by the way. Doctor, I should want your cooperation. I should be delighted. You don't mind breaking the law, not in the least, nor running a chance of arrest, not in a good cause. Oh, the cause is excellent. Then your man, I was sure that I might rely on you. But what is it you wish? When Mrs. Turner has brought in the tray, I will make it clear to you now, he said. As he turned hungrily on the simple fare that our landlord had provided, I must discuss it while I eat, for I have not much time. It's nearly 5 now. In 2 hours we must be on the scene of action. Miss Irene or Madame rather returns from her drive at 700. We must be at Bryony Lodge to meet her. And what then? You must leave that to me. I have already arranged what is to occur. There is only one point on which I must insist. You must not interfere. Come what may, you understand, I am to be neutral, to do nothing whatever. There will probably be some small unpleasantness. Do not join in it. It will end in my being conveyed into the house 4 or 5 minutes afterwards. The sitting-room window will open. You are to station yourself close to that open window. Yes, you are to watch me, for I will be visible to you. Yes, and when I raise my hand, so you will throw into the room what I give you to throw, and will at the same time raise the cry of fire. You quite follow me entirely. It is nothing very formidable, he said, taking a long cigar-shaped R from his pocket. It is an ordinary plumber, smoke rocket fitted with a cap at either end to make it self-lighting. Your task is confined to that. When you raise your cry of fire, it will be taken up by quite a number of people. You may then walk to the end of the street, and I will rejoin you in 10 minutes. I hope that I've made myself clear. I am to remain neutral, to get near the window to watch you, and at the signal to throw in this object, then to raise the cry fire, and to await you at the corner of the street. Precisely then, you may entirely rely on me. That is excellent, I think. Perhaps it is almost time that I prepare for the new role I have to play. Disappeared into his bedroom, and returned in a few minutes in the character of an amiable and simple-minded, nonconformist clergyman, his broad black hat, his baggy trousers, his white tie, his sympathetic smile, and the general look of peering and benevolent curiosity were such as Mr. John Hare alone could have equaled. It was not merely that Holmes changed his costume, his expression, his manner, his very soul seemed to vary with every fresh part, that he assumed the stage lost a fine actor, even a science lost an acute reasoner, when he became a specialist in crime. It was 6:15 when we left Baker Street, and it still wanted 10 minutes to the hour. When we found ourselves in Serpentine Avenue, it was already dusk, and the lamps were just being lighted as we paced up and down in front of Bry Lodge, waiting for the coming of its occupant. The house was just such as I had pictured it from Sherlock Holmes's succinct description, but the locality appeared to be less private than I expected on the way. Contrary, for a small street in a quiet neighborhood, it was remarkably animated. There was a group of shabby-dressed men smoking and laughing in a corner, a scissors grinder with his wheel, 2 guardsmen who were flirting with a nurse girl, and several well-dressed young men who were lounging up and down with cigars in their mouths. You see, remarked Holmes, as we paced to and fro in front of the house. This marriage rather simplifies matters. The photograph becomes a double-edged weapon. Now the chances are that she would be as averse to its being seen by Mr. Godfrey Norton as our client to its coming to the eyes of his princess. Now the question is, where are we to find the photograph? Where indeed it is most unlikely that she carries it about with her. It is cabinet size too large for easy concealment about a woman's dress. She knows that the king is capable of having her waylaid and searched. 2 attempts of the sort have already been made. We may take it, then, that she does not carry it back out. With her, where then her banker or her lawyer, there is that double possibility, but I am inclined to think neither women are naturally secretive, and they like to do their own secreting. Why should she hand it over to anyone else? She could trust her own guardianship, but she could not tell what indirect or political influence might be brought to bear upon a businessman. Besides, remember that she had resolved to use it within a few days. It must be where she can lay her hands upon it. It must be in her own house. P. It has twice been burgled. They did not know how to look, but how will you look? I will not look. What then? I will get her to show me, but she'll refuse. She will not be able to. But I hear the rumble of wheels. It is her carriage now. Carry out my orders to the letter as he spoke. The gleam of the sidelights of a carriage came around the curve of the avenue. It was a smart little lander, which rattled up to the door of Bryony Lodge. As it pulled up, one of the loafing men at the corner dashed forward to open the door in the hope of earning a copper, but was elbowed away by another loafer who had rushed up with the same intention. A fierce quarrel broke out, which was increased by the two guardsmen who took sides with one of them lounges, and by the scissors grinder, who was equally hot upon the other side. A blow was struck, and in an instant the lady who had stepped from her carriage was the center of a little knot of flushed and struggling men who struck savagely at each other with fists and sticks. Holmes dashed into the crowd to protect the lady, but just as he reached her, he gave a cry and dropped to the ground with the blood running freely down his face. At his fall, the guardsmen took to their heels in one direction, and the loungers in the other, while a number of better-dressed people who had watched the scuff without taking part in it crowded in to help the lady and to attend to the injured man. Irene Adler, as I will still call her, had hurried up the steps, but she stood at the top with her superb figure outlined against the lights of the hall. Looking back into the street is the poor gentleman. "Much hurt?" she asked. "He's dead," cried several voices. No, there's life in him," shouted another, "but be gone before you can get him into hospital." "He's a brave fellow," said a woman. They would have had that lady's purse and watch if it hadn't been for him. There were a gang and a rough one, too. "Oh, he's breathing now. He can't lie in the street. May we bring him in?" "Mom, surely bring him into the sitting room. There's a comfortable sofa this way. Please." Slowly and solemnly, he was borne into Bryony Lodge and laid out in the principal room, while I stood, observed the proceedings from my post by the window. The lamps had been lit, but the blinds hadn't been drawn, so that I could see holes as he lay upon the couch. I do not know whether he was seized with compunction at that moment for the part he was playing, but I know that I have never felt more heartily ashamed of myself in my life than when I saw the beautiful creature against whom I was conspiring, or the grace and kindliness with which she waited upon the injured man. And yet it would be the blackest treachery to Holmes to draw back now from the part which he'd entrusted to me. I hardened my heart and took the smoke rocket from under my ulster. After all, I thought, we're not injuring her. We are but preventing her from injuring another. Holmes had sat up upon the couch, and I saw him motion. Like a man who's in need of air, a maid rushed across and threw up in the window. At the same instant, I saw him raise his hand, and at the signal, I tossed my rocket into the room with a cry of fire. The word was no sooner out of my mouth than the whole crowd of spectators, well-dressed, and ill-gentlemen ostlers and servant-maids joined in a general shriek of fire. Thick clouds of smoke curled through the room and out at the open window. I caught a glimpse of rushing figures, and a moment later the voice of Holmes from within assuring them that it was a false alarm slipping through the shouting crowd. I made my way to the corner of the street, and in 10 minutes was rejoiced to find my friend's arm in mine, and to get away from the scene of uproar. He walked swiftly and in silence for some few minutes until we had turned down one of the quiet streets which lead towards the Edgware Road. "You did it very nicely, Doctor," he remarked. "Nothing could have been better. It is all right. You have the photograph? I know where it is. And how did you find out?" She showed me, as I told you she would. "I'm still in the dark." "I do not wish to make a mystery," said he. Laughing, the matter was perfectly simple. You of course saw that everyone in the street was an accomplice. They were all engaged for the evening, I guess. As much, then, when the hour broke out, I had a little moist red paint in the palm of my hand. I rushed forward, fell down, clapped my hand to my face, and became a Pau spectacle. It's an old shriek. This also I could fathom. Then they carried me in. She was bound to have me, in what else could she do, and into her sitting room, which was the very room, which I suspected it lay between that and her bedroom. And I was determined to see which they laid me on a couch. I motioned for air. They were compelled to open the window, and you had your chance. How did that help you? It was all important when a woman thinks that her house is on fire. Her instinct is at once to rush to the thing which she values most. It is to perfectly overpowering impulse, and I have more than once taken advantage of it. In the case of the Darlington substitution scandal, it was of use to me. And also in the Armsworth Castle business, married woman grabs at her baby, an unmarried one riches for her jewel box. Now it was clear to me that Our Lady of today had nothing in the house more precious to her than what we are in quest of. She would rush to secure it. The alarm of fire was admirably done. The smoke and shouting were enough to shake nerves of steel. She responded beautifully. The photograph is in a recess, behind a sliding panel just above the right bell pull. She was there in an instant, and I caught a glimpse of it as she half threw it out. When I cried out that it was a false alarm, she replaced it, glanced at the rocket, rushed from the room, and I have not seen her since I arose, and making my excuses, escaped from the house. I hesitated whether to attempt to secure the photograph at once, but the coachman had come in, and as he was watching me narrowly, it seemed safer to wait a little. Over precipitance may ruin all. And now I asked, our quest is practically finished. I shall call with the king tomorrow, and with you. If you care to come with us, we will be shown into the sitting room to wait for the lady, but it is probable that when she comes in, she may find neither as nor the photograph. It might be a satisfaction to His Majesty to regain it with his own hands. And when will you call? At 8 in the morning. She will not be up, so that we shall have a clear field. Besides, we must be prompt, for this marriage may mean a complete change in her life and habits. I must W to the king without delay. We had reached Baker Street, and had stopped at the door. He was searching his pockets for the key, when someone passing said, "Knight, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." There were several people on the pavement at the time, but the greeting appeared to come from a slim youth in austere who had hurried by. "I've heard that voice before," said Holmes, staring down the dimly lit street. "Now I wonder who." The deuce that could have been 3. I slept at Baker Street that night, and we were engaged. Upon our toast and coffee in the morning, when the King of Bohemia rushed into the room. "Have you really got it?" he cried, grasping Sherlock Holmes by either shoulder and looking eagerly into his face. "Not yet." "But you have hopes." "I have hopes then. Come, I am all impatience to be gone. We must have a cab. No, my brougham is waiting. Then that will simplify matters." We descended and started off once more. For Bryony, love, Irene. "Adler is married," remarked Holmes. "Married, then, yesterday. But to whom? To an English lawyer named Norton. But she could not love him. I'm in hopes that she does, and why in hopes? Because it would spare your Majesty all fear of future annoyance. If the lady loves her husband, she does not love your Majesty. If she does not love your Majesty, there is no reason why she should interfere with your Majesty's plan. It is true. And yet, well, I wish she had been of my own station, that a queen she would have made." He relapsed into a moody silence which was not broken. Until we drew up in Serpentine Avenue, the door of Bry Lodge was open, and an elderly woman stood upon the steps. She watched us with a sardonic eye. As we stepped from the brougham, "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," I believe, said she. "I am Mr. Holmes," answered my companion, looking at her with a questioning and rather startled gaze. "Indeed, my mistress told me that you were likely to call. She left this morning with her husband by the 5:15 train from Charing Cross for the Continent." What? Sherlock Holmes staggered back, white with shock and surprise. "Do you mean that she has left England, never to return? And the peers asked the King Haley, all is lost. We shall see." He pushed past the servant and rushed into the drawing-room, followed by the king and myself. The furniture was scattered about in every direction, with dismantled shelves and open drawers, as if the lady had hurriedly ransacked them. Before her flight, Holmes rushed at the bell-pull, tore back a small sliding shutter, and plunging in his hand, pulled out a photograph and a letter. The photograph was of Irene Adler herself in evening dress. The letter was superscribed to Sherlock Holmes, Esquire, to be left till. Called for. My friend tore it open, and we all three read it together. It was dated at midnight of the preceding night, and ran in this way. My dear Sherlock Holmes, you really did it very well. You took me in completely until after the alarm of fire. I had not a suspicion. But then when I found how I had betrayed myself, I began to think I had been warned against you. Months ago, I had been told that if the king employed an agent, it would certainly be you, and your address had been given me. Yet, with all this, you made me reveal what you wanted to know. Even after I became suspicious, I found it hard to think evil of such a dear, kind old clergyman. But, you know, I've been trained as an actress myself. Male costume is nothing new to me. I often take advantage of the freedom which it gives. I sent John the coachman to watch you ran upstairs, got into my walking clothes, as I call them, and came down, just as you departed. Well, I followed you to your door, and so made sure that I was really an object of interest to the celebrated Mr. Sherlock Holmes, then rather imprudently wished you good night, and started for the Temple to see my husband. We both thought the best resource was flight when pursued by so formidable an antagonist. So you will find the nest empty when you call tomorrow. As to the photograph, your client may rest in peace. I love and am loved by a better man than he. The king may do what he will without hindrance from one whom he has cruelly wronged. I kept it only to safeguard myself and to preserve a weapon which will always secure me from any steps which he might take in the future. I leave a photograph which he might care to possess, and I remain, dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, very truly yours, Irene Norton, née Andler, F.V.O.F. Men, cried the King of Bohemia, when we had all three read this epistle. Did I not tell you how? And resolute she was. Would she not have met an admirable queen? Is it not a pity that she was not on my level from what I've seen of the lady? She seems indeed to be on a very different level. To your Majesty, said Holmes coldly, I am sorry that I have not been able to bring your Majesty's business to a more successful conclusion. On the contrary, my dear sir, cried the king, nothing could be more successful. I know that her bier is inviolate. The photograph is now as safe as it were in the fire. I'm glad to hear your Majesty say so. I am immensely indebted to you. Pray tell me, in V, way I can reward you this ring. He slipped an emerald snake ring from his finger and held it out upon the palm of his hand. Your Majesty has something which I should value even more. Highly, said Holmes, you have. But to name it, the photograph. The king stared at him in amazement. Irene's photograph, he cried. Certainly, if you wish it. I thank your Majesty. Then there is no more to be done in the matter. I have the honor to wish you a very good morning. He bowed, and turning away without observing the hand which the king had stretched out to him, he set off in my company for his chambers. And that was how a great scandal threatened to affect the kingdom of Bohemia, and how the best plans of Mr. Sherlock Holmes were beaten by a woman's wit. He used to make merry over the cleverness of women, but I have not heard him do it of late. And when he speaks of Irene Adler, or when he refers to her photograph, it is always under the honorable title of the woman. If you like that story, consider supporting me as a patron. That way you help me make more stories for you, and get access to a patron-only library of stories, lots more hours for you to listen. Music, too. So that was a scandal. In Bohemia, published in 1891, written by Arthur Conan Doyle, later Sir Arthur Conan, and Doyle. We've done a few home stories now. So I'm guessing that you've heard his biography. He was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, to a family of Irish descent, hence Conan Doyle. He was a doctor. When he was, all this. Okay, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about this story. So published in 1891, first appear appeared in print in July 1891 in the Strand magazine Strand, later became intrinsically linked with the Sherlock Holmes stories. This was the first of the Sherlock Holmes short stories to be published, which followed the two novels A Study in Scarlet, 1887, and The Sign for 189.90 later. The scandal in Bohemia was collected, of course, so this is the first short story of Sherlock Holmes. And the Victorian reading public spent a lot of time reading stories in magazines, often serialized, but sometimes whole magazines. And this, it's argued that this move of Conan Doyle from novel-length mysteries to the more concise and immediately gratifying format of short stories was instrumental in cementing Holmes' popularity with the reading public. I think, yes, that's true. And so the detective story went into the short story mode, not just the novel. And of course, think Agatha Christie, she did both. She did both novels and short stories, obviously, much later. But certainly detective stories in that time had a very strong presence of short stories. I would argue that now most fiction is novel length and has been for decades, although I think there is a returning popularity of the short story. Maybe that's just from my perspective, because I tend to read and narrate short stories rather than novels. So maybe it's just me and, what they call that, the availability heuristic. And I remember when my wife was pregnant, I saw pregnant women everywhere. And when I broke my arm, I saw people with broken arms everywhere. And now I've got dogs. I sally with dogs everywhere. And when I had kids, little kids, there were little kids everywhere. And now I just see dogs. I don't see broken-armed people. I don't see pregnant ladies. I don't see toddlers as much, hear them often, but don't see them. So it's maybe just, I think, and I'm going around the houses, as always, a long way of saying maybe the rising popularity of the short story is my own observation, and that is not underline to Holmes's point about noticing the 17 steps. Now, what else do we want to say about this story? It's the first short story. A move sees a move into short stories, and arguably, I don't think that is the only reason for Sherlock Holmes's popularity. I think which was a soar with a reasoning machine. This idea of detectives being superum goes back to P.O. really with Auguste Dupin, a P.E. letter which we've read on the podcast. But something about Holmes's superiority, but also his humanity, is relieved by his trouble with relationships and the human side. He's like a calculating machine, except he isn't. And of course, this ties very neatly in with Jungian psychology, which of course says that you have your persona, which is those qualities of yourself that you present to the world, which are associated with you. But their opposite also lurks in your shadow, and you aren't very good at the qualities that lurk in your shadow, and you tend to project them out and see them in other people because they are unstable and frightening to you. And I would argue this is what we see with Holmes's emotions. And that's very much brought out in this particular story. I mean, Watson spends a lot of time talking about how Holmes was not one for emotion, and how emotion would be like grit in The Great Machine. It'd be like, he doesn't say this, it'd be like spilling coffee on your computer. It's not wanted because it would unseat his rationality for which he was famous. And that was his bread and butter, really his rationality. So if emotions come in, they're very unsettling. One of the things I think about this story is it actually showcases Conan Doyle's skill as a writer, because two things happen here. First of all, we have the woman who's Irene Adler, and there's bits to say about Irene Ad, but we may suspect from the fact that Holmes keeps the sovereign she gave him at her wedding he plans to keep it on his watch chain, isn't it? And also for his reward, he wants a photograph of her, and this would, in any lesser person, would suggest that he was enamored of her. And Watson at the beginning makes a big play, a big deal, out of the fact there was no such thing as love. And I think, and certainly Holmes doesn't say the things that we expect in love stories about him, swooning over Irene Adler. There are certain things about what is her fantastic figure. I don't think they say fantastic, and she's beautiful, she's gracious, she's clever. She outwits Holmes. She is, the sort of woman one might expect someone to fall in love, a man who was interested in women to fall in love with. Yeah. But it's not. Watson explicitly denies it, and Holmes doesn't do anything to suggest explicitly. He doesn't say anything. He isn't seen giving her lingering glances or anything like that. He doesn't flirt with her. He only meets. Does he actually meet her? Yeah, he meets her when he's pretending to be the clergyman. So, there's nothing overtly, yet we get the strong sense that Holmes has a bit of a crush on her. And that's genius. He doesn't say anything to suggest that he leaves us to read it. And I think that is a sign that he's a good writer. And the other thing is, of course, the red herring is that Watson, as I said, explicitly says there was no such thing as love. But what we know about Watson's role is to be a bit dense, isn't it? Watson is every man. He is there to be our eyes. And we aren't particularly smart. We are not Sherlock Holmes, so Watson, throughout the stories, get it pretty wrong a number of times. And because we know that about Watson, it casts out on his view that there was no such thing as love. We know we can't actually trust Watson because Watson gets it wrong in the sense he's an unreliable narrator. So that's why I think it's really good. So what about Irene? First of all, she's introduced by the prince, who is the king rather, who is an unsympathetic character. And I was channeling, the giant in, is it Annie the Giant, Andre the Giant in The Princess Bride. I was channeling him. That's whose voice I was trying to do. Although Andre the Giant is actually quite a sympathetic character in the Princess Bride movie. I found it really hard to read the book, to be honest, but in fact I didn't manage it, but I really loved the movie. Anyway, Andre the Giant, that's who the king was his voice. Only he's not his character. And again, nothing particularly is said to show that this guy is an unsympathetic man. And then he said something bad. Then a cad, let's say, he introduces as a famous adventuress. And so we're introduced to this woman as if she's some kind of conniving gold digger, aren't we? And that she's linked, and she's American, of course. I only remembered she was American. Gail Hutt apparently played her in the Jeremy Brett version, who was a very beautiful woman. And I only realized she was American after I'd done her as an English woman, and also possibly when I do my comic accents, it kind of takes away from their dignity, I think. So I was happy to do a comic accent for the king, because I didn't care if he had any dignity. But Irene Adler, I must admit I had a bit of a crush on her as well, and I didn't want to take away from her dignity of doing some kind of sort of Brooklyn, my version of a Brooklyn accent. Okay? So he's not nice, and we're like, and he's had a burgle twice and way aid. And you're like, right? Okay? And he apologizes for himself. He blames her. She was a famous adventuress, and he was only young. And come on, And so the king doesn't AC come across, and Holmes laughs at him at one point, and of course famously refuses to shake his hand at the end, or he doesn't shake his hand. So I think, again, Conan Doyle is showing, not telling. He doesn't tell us what Holmes thinks of the king, but we know because of the way he's written it, because of the way he's shown it. So I think, again, a tribute to Conan Doyle's writing there. And if we look at Irene Adler, she's gracious. She is sympathetic towards the clergyman. That, of course, disguises, or a Sherlock Holmes thing. She is a nice person. And she's beautiful and good. Don't go together. Although the Greeks thought they did, and we tend to think they do, but they don't. You can be beautiful without being good, and good without being beautiful. It's great if you're both, and rich as well. All three really work. But together there's a synergy there. But some of us only have one or two of them. Yeah, okay. So what else do we want to say about Irene Adler? She's clever, and she's smart. She's intuitive. She susses him. Not many people in these stories suss Sherlock Holmes. And she has this intuition that she gets him. And also, it's kind of set up to suggest that the man she marries, this lawyer, is possibly a bit of a adventurer, if you like. He's trying to get something out of it. But ultimately, it appears that it's just a love thing, And so she's decent, she's honest, she is. And if you think what she was going to do is send the photograph, was that to warn the woman? She wasn't going to do it. Once he was married and ruined the marriage, she was going to send it when on his. Betrothal perhaps to warn the woman who's got engaged to him that he's a bit of a bleep, 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 you know? So again, I think Aaron Adler is beautifully written, and showing, not telling, really works for that. And the subversion of the expectation is the issue that, again, attribute to this being a superior type of detective story. The golden age of detective stories was not quite in its swing at this point, but their detectives are superum, aren't they? And in many cases, I don't know, every single detective, every story of every detective. But, Holmes is outwitted. Holmes fails that setup because Watson says, his invariable success, and guess what? He doesn't succeed. So I think this is an absolutely wonderful piece of writing craft. And I thought, as I was reading it, one of the reasons why it works really well is we have the traditional setup. Here's the client coming in, which we see a lot in the Sherlock HMS stories. The story is given to us. And then we also, as I've said before, it turns out the story isn't exactly right, but then we have the detection. And usually what happens is Holmes goes off detecting. He works it all out. We have a bit of that. His detection is to find out where the photograph is, and he does it perfectly. And then his next part is the plan to get in the house and find, yeah, that's it. It's all done perfectly, isn't it? And then we expect the Denham, we expect them to turn up at Aaron Atlas' house, it all to be worked out, and the mystery, the plot, the case to be solved, the picture to go to the king to be happy. And we expect that, but he subverts it, because that is not what happens. And in part 3, chapter 3, Aaron Adler has the last laugh in a sense. But it's done it's not Marathi, is it? And of course, the other thing about this is this story sets up the idea of Holmes having adversaries who are his equal, if not his superior peruse. And that happens in Marathi later on. We read the final problem, didn't we, whereby Moriarty does him to death, although he rises again from the grave. I hope that's not a spoiler to you. If it is, you need to get with the program, really, because it's only a 100-odd years out of date. That spoiler anyway. So there we are. So, there's probably loads more to say, but it's a story that I admire, you might say. Why are you doing all the Sherlock Holmeses and Agatha Christie's, and I like them. That's why I'll do other people, but I like my hard boil. Stuff hasn't come off yet. I don't know what Brendan's doing. He hasn't got back to me. But anyway, I hope you're all well. Hope you enjoyed that, and more next week.